read the few judgments that I have read, sometimes I do see, instances where people are being called feeble-minded. So here it is. Here it feels, understands, wills, but imperfectly, does nothing, thinks of nothing, cares for nothing. A soul shut up in imperfect organs. And today, the American Association of Mental Retardation has a different definition. To my mind, of course, even this definition, it still talks about deficits that are there in people. It still talks about what is lacking in people. It does not talk about what is there and what are the abilities that people have. And apart from, and that probably will come somewhere in the future. Yes. Disability is a relative term. Who is a person with disability? It is a very relative term, as Mr. Rao just pointed out. In different countries, different people are disabled. In different situations, different people are disabled. In our own country, in the rural area, in a more homogeneous community, people with mental disability are not necessarily seen as disabled, whereas in an urban area, people would be seen as disabled. So what I'm trying to say is that the whole area, the people with intellectual disability are being looked at very differently today. Not very recently. Again, a few years ago, I would say about 20 years ago, we still thought that children with mental retardation who were severely disabled could not be educated. They were put away into a category that was called a custodial category. So they were categorized in a way which said that these children cannot be educated. Today we are thinking differently. Today we are saying no, everybody has the right to education. And everybody can be educated. That I think is a big, major move that has happened over these last many years. Today we have people with intellectual disability advocating for their own rights. Maybe next time when you have a colloquium, you will have a person with mental disability here instead of me, advocating and telling you about their own situation. I believe in the International Convention on Disability, where Anuradha is a participant, there is a person, a young person with intellectual disability who is actually there and advocating for their own rights. The International Convention, which is now presently being framed, is today talking about equal capacity in law, which is something that probably was unheard of or even unthinkable, probably is even unthinkable at this point of time in our country. I think it's time for us to break out of stereotypes that we have of people, stereotypes and myths that we've built up for many, many years about what a person can or cannot do. Unfortunately, with people with intellectual disabilities, it has always been what this person cannot do. This person cannot do. It has never been a situation of what this person can do and should do and what are the rights of this person. I just go a little bit, I think you all are very aware of this, but again I will go into the situation that we have in our country at this point. To me, it is really a devaluing of the person. To me, we are devaluing people who are very much part of the society, young children, adults, old people who have intellectual disability. It starts, as Mr. Rao pointed out just now, in the hospital, right in the beginning, when the family goes to the hospital and is told again and again, nothing can happen with this child. This is an experience of family after family, and I cannot tell you, probably express the way a family feels when they are told nothing can happen to your child. Very often the rehab process, if whatever it is, stops right there and then. It starts in the hospital. It starts with the fact that a family is very rarely informed about what has happened to the child. what can be done to the child. A family is very rarely referred to an agency or to people who can support that child or who can support that family. So if you just say nothing can happen and do not refer the child, do not refer the family, do not explain what has happened, then it becomes extremely difficult for families, and very often many a year is lost for the child and for the family trying to understand what has happened. This is the first situation that happens. When it comes to going to schools, children with intellectual disability will rarely be seen in general schools, unless of course they are there by default. The many voluntary organizations, such as the one that I run also, that are there, are highly unregulated. I'm sorry to say, but we are in a situation at this point of time that when we do work with children with mental disability or with multiple disability, there is no regulation of the kind of work that we may do. I think there is a point that Mr. Rao was also making here. What are the strategies we use? We are not affiliated to any boards of education. So when a child comes to an ASTA, for example, and spends about 10 years in ASTA, studying, learning, and comes out of ASTA, there is no certificate that the child gets. There is nothing to say that the child has passed this class. There is no board which says that this is a child that has passed out. And I think it is a travesty of the rights of any person to receive education in such a situation. Recently, you all are probably aware of the Right to Education bill that is being debated at this point of time. And in this bill and in the recent policy, the draft policy of disability that we've had, there has been a mention of children with severe intellectual disability and also children with just profound and severe disability. It has been said that they cannot be part of the mainstream education system and therefore should either be educated at home or should be educated in other appropriate environments. And many of us have had cause to take issue with this because we feel that children studying in the home is not a possibility. A child with severe intellectual disability should not be taught only in the house. Every child has a right to be educated. Whether it is a school that is a general school or a school that specializes in working with a child with special needs, schools need to be legitimate, they need to be recognized, they need to have particular curriculums. So that's the other thing that happens. Government schemes, if you look at government schemes for children and people with intellectual disability, they are highly inappropriate. They do not look at what is the need. Just a simple example I give you from Delhi. We have the bus pass, the DTC bus pass for people with disability. But there is no bus pass for a young child or a person with intellectual disability. So what I'm trying to say here is it is not thought of at all. For people with psychosocial disability, mental illness, as Dr. Bhagat is going to speak in more detail, there are no schemes. People with intellectual disability, children with intellectual disability are extremely vulnerable, particularly when it comes to situations of natural disasters, when it comes to situations of violence, because very often they are not able to communicate, or the way they communicate is not understood by others. And that becomes a situation where if you are not understood, very much alike what Mr. Rao was talking about, it becomes very difficult to put forth what has happened to children. There is extreme inequality of all opportunities. And this leads to the isolation of a person. It leads to the isolation of a young, right from when this person is a child. Can you imagine a child who has no friends? No friends. Can you imagine a child who is at home the whole time and not have any friends coming in, not able to go out anywhere, not able to be part of the society, mix in the community, because they are seen as unequal, because they are devalued in our society today. But this unfortunately is the situation with a large number of people and children with intellectual disabilities. And this, added to this, is the fact that we do not believe that there is any level of capacity that this person has. Go to the next, please. I'd just like to go to the legal situation here. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that I find that, we have the Persons with Disabilities Act, and it is an act that gives people a lot of rights. It talks about full participation, there's affirmative action, non-discrimination. It talks about the right to education for all children with disability. It talks about employment. And but on the other hand, I think as Justice Sikri did raise this issue, you have a whole lot of laws in our country which deal with unsound mind. And if I am correct, people with intellectual disability are very often interpreted to have an unsound mind. So on the one hand, we are saying this person must be educated, there must be employment, there must be non-discrimination, full participation, equality of rights. On the other hand, you cannot contract, I don't need to tell you this, but you are unable to give consent when there's any medical intervention. I'm sure you're all aware of the fact that many young women with intellectual disabilities, hysterectomies are done for fear of sexual abuse. And when the person has no say in something as big as this, it is something to worry about. The third thing, we do have the National Trust Act. The National Trust Act, as Mrs. Guha spoke about in the morning, of course basically deals with guardianship. It is an act that deals more with, it is a protective act. It protects the person because it gives the guardian total control over this person with intellectual disability. I would of course question that also. It is of course very enabling for the family because there are many worries that the family has. But there are many provisions in guardianship, which I'll come to slightly later, which may protect the person but which may actually take away their rights. It is something that I feel we need to really look at because people with intellectual disability, as people with psychosocial disability, are very often in this kind of no man's land. And the other side of the scenario is this the draft convention that is coming up, where we are talking, and I'm sure Anuradha will deal much more with this, that we are talking about people with disabilities have the right to recognition everywhere as persons before the law. State parties shall recognize that people with disabilities have legal capacity on an equal basis with others in all fields, and shall ensure to the extent possible that where support is required to exercise that capacity, assist that capacity to act, the assistance provided is proportional to the degree of support required and tailored to the person's circumstances. So it seems to me that we have a range of ideas here. At one hand, the convention is now saying equal capacity. Of course, it's not saying totally equal. It's talking about support, but it is saying equal capacity. On the other hand, we have, we have the Persons with Disabilities Act in India. We have the range of other acts which probably forbid the person from getting married, having a family, having so many other things that you and I enjoy. So what do we do in a situation like this? My one action point here would be that we need to re-examine the laws and the policies regarding the status of people with intellectual disability in our country. And I would appeal that there is no better people than you, sirs and ma'ams, to do that. I'd like to come to one or two basic issues that we are facing, and we talked about the Persons with Disabilities Act. The disability certificate. The disability certificate is a major document, as you are all aware. It is the document that certifies disability in our country. It is the document that says you are a person with disability. Therefore, it is a very, very major and most important document under the Persons with Disabilities Act. But at the ground level, the problems that we are facing, and this is particularly so for people with intellectual disability, is that there are very few provisions for actually giving and providing the disability certificate. The certificate, unfortunately, and what is even further worse, is often wrongly given. We have IQ scores, unfortunately, and we're talking again of capacity. How do you judge the capacity of a person? Do you judge it after 20 minutes of sitting with a child and coming up with an IQ score? Is that what we say is then the brand that this person has, the label that this person has for the rest of their lives? This is a certificate that entitles you to get all the benefits that you have under the Act. This is a certificate that is going to become increasingly important document for people with disability. And yet, what is happening there today? Particularly for people with multiple disability and intellectual disability, I'm speaking because that is my experience only. There is inappropriate labeling happening. We spoke today about people with autism. We know that people with autism are not part of the Persons with Disabilities Act. So what is happening? At this point of time, they're getting certificates as people with intellectual disability. I can show you certificate after certificate of young children who have been labeled as severely disabled and profoundly disabled when they are not so. This is because assessment or understanding what is the capacity of a person cannot be done in such a short span of time. We have to think of different ways of assessing and evaluating and valuing people. I see this as once again a way of devaluing people. This is not a problem that is India, that is only in Delhi. Some of us in Delhi have been trying to work on it, but unfortunately I think maybe in the action point that's why I put that probably we need to now look at a PIL. Because of the way it is being done in hospitals. There was a PIL that was earlier filed by social jurist Ashok Agarwal, and that spoke about the medical boards that were to be put in every government hospital. And the fact that the disability certificate is to be, it's to be put up, that the disability certificate is given in the hospital, it is to be put up in the hospitals. And even though there was a judgment that was passed in most Delhi hospitals, if you go there today, you will see that is not done. So I don't know what the answer is, probably you know better than me. I feel as action points for this, there are many things more in the disability certificate, but I'll just say here that as far as action points are concerned, I think there needs to be a sustained advocacy for us to change the way assessments are done for disability certificates. Because it is actually against the human rights of a person.
The other thing I'd like to request you is that please, it's gone, maybe I'm down enough.
I would like to request you is please do not make any decisions or judgments solely on the basis of disability certificate. I'm saying this because if it may be very, very wrong. Please look at what are the abilities of the person. Please look at how the person functions in that particular environment, in that particular society before making a decision. Because I'm also saying this because it will probably be the disability certificate that is presented to you as documentary evidence. Please consider what the family, what the person has to say. Please do consider what the person has to say, because what the person has to say is very valuable. Please consider what the family has to say, what friends and people who work with the person probably have to say when you are making a judgment in any particular case that comes up before you when you deal with people with intellectual disability. The other action point that I'd like to point out is the right to education. The right to education, I've spoken in detail about this, so I'm not going to go into detail here. I will just go into the action points here. I would like to ask is, could we critically evaluate the right to education from the point of view of human rights of the child with disability and from the values of inclusion and equal participation that are there in our Persons with Disabilities Act? Because we are talking today about children with severe intellectual disability and profound disabilities being left out of the system. I am not saying that they need to sit in the same class as another child. What I am saying is that they need to have the they have the right to have an education with the same values, the same systems of education that any other child has in this country. And they need to have an education that is a legitimate education. The other major area that I'd like to talk about is residential institutions for people with intellectual disability. As Mrs. Aloka Guha said in the morning, that residential institutions are not the answer. There is, however, an increased need for institutions and homes for people with intellectual disability. And this need often comes from a family. I feel it comes from the family not because the family wants to put away the person, but because there are no support structures for that person. When you have inequality of opportunity, when you have no place where this person or young adult or adult can go to, when the person cannot be gainfully employed, when the person has no recreational outlets, when the person has no friends, then in that situation, very often families are in a situation when they ask for institutions, or in a situation where the big worry is what is going to happen after me. We all know prolonged institutionalization for any person will lead to additional disability. It is not going to lessen the disability. It is not a natural place for any human being to live in. So therefore, I would request once again is that whenever a person is being institutionalized, in the name of protection probably, because sometimes it is necessary, that protection always goes along with empowerment. So please always see that there is something that is empowering for that person. If it's a child, then that child is getting education and being prepared to go out of that institution, not remain in that institution for the rest of their lives. Better education, jobs, recreational opportunities, greater acceptance, and support in caretaking. Because caretaking is a difficult job and many people do require caretaking. Training in independent living. These are the things I feel if they are there, then probably there will be less demand for institutions and homes for people with intellectual disability. Side by side, it is extremely important for us to also work out norms for institutionalization. If ever there is institutionalization, what are the norms? How are the checks and balances going to be kept? Last, we just want to end with a whole lot of action points. I'm so sorry, I have action points, but this is the last. I'd like to ask for a review of the Persons with Disabilities Act from the point of view of the rights of people with intellectual disabilities. Reading the HRLN compendium and the compendium that is being put forward by the Chief Commissioner of Disability in all the cases that have taken place under the Persons with Disabilities Act, I see a lot of cases on employment, a lot of cases on education. I see very few cases dealing with the rights of people with intellectual disability. And I'm wondering why. Is it because we don't feel that we can make this, that we can have cases in this area? Or is it because families feel that there is this, or is it because we feel that there is no question of using this act for people with mental disability? The other thing is review laws and policies in relation to capacity. We need to do that in today's world. avoid legal decisions on the basis of disability certificate. I know it's sounding a little didactic, and that's not the way I meant it to be. These are requests. Please ensure of the equality of opportunity, particularly in education. This is this is something that we're talking about today. The Right to Education Bill is on the anvil. That is why I want to bring your attention to this. Please discuss the ability of the person to give testimony in court. Each person with mental disability is different. People do have capacity to tell you about what they feel and what has happened with them. So please, it should not be the age-old thing about, asking just a family or somebody else. You can also ask the person. And also to ensure that provisions for protection, that is guardianship or institutionalization, are enabling for the person with disability. That is, if they have to have it. Okay. To speak, Mr. Mahendra Rastogi is the chairperson of the advocacy cell of the All India Confederation of the Blind. He has been closely associated with training and rehabilitation of the blind persons and works for vocational rehabilitation center.
Lordships and ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed grateful for the organizers of this colloquium for giving me the opportunity to express my views and share my experiences with this august gathering. I am here in two capacities. I am working in advocacy group of an organization of the blind, as well as I am a bureaucrat working for the Ministry of Labour and Employment, who is responsible for the evaluation, training and employment of the persons with cross disabilities. Before I begin, I would like to interact on 2 points raised by Mr. Rao. Mr. Rao, it's not that there are no graduates amongst the deaf persons. There may be proportionately fewer in number, but there are persons who have not only done graduation but even have excelled in post-graduation degrees, and I have the privilege and the pride of having placed them in very high posts, and they are totally deaf, not that they are hearing impaired persons. They may be fewer in number, as I said, when we compare proportionately with the normal people. The other point that I would like to interact is on this universality of the sign language. I think we can derive the experience from the Braille script. Braille is a script with which the blind persons read and write. The paper that I have are in Braille. And it is universally accepted system where all the languages can be written and can be read. Similarly, perhaps effort is already on to have some universal sign language for the benefit of the persons with hearing impairment. Let me share my experience. How do I interact with the deaf people? I am a blind, and many times deaf persons come to us. And if they are computer literate, then how do I interact with them? I write something, whatever I have to ask or suggest to them on computer, they read it, and they write on the computer, and I listen through JAWS, that is software with which the blind people can get the input. So it is not that things are not there in place. Maybe we don't have to be satisfied with the current situation because development is always required, it has to take place. Anyway, now I'll come to my topic, and I'm not going to speak about my struggle or my achievements. Now that I'm going to give you any any presentations, it would only be the status of the visually impaired persons in the country as it stands today and the support of the judiciary. To begin with, my sincere and deep appreciation to the initiative taken by the HRNL and the NHRC for an event which was long overdue, much so in the context of conflicting interpretation and stands taken by various courts across the country on plethora of issues covered under disability legislations. The visual impairment, as it stands, To a common man, VH means blind person who cannot see and therefore is an object of pity, totally dependent on others. But to a visually handicapped person himself, it only means the loss of one of the 5 sense organs, which can be overcome and compensated by judiciously training remaining 4 sense organs. In fact, it is not the loss of vision that makes us handicapped. It is rather apathy, ignorance, prejudices, misconceptions, and lack of equal opportunities that makes us disabled. Many living legends in India and the world over are live testimony of the fact that given opportunities, the visually handicapped persons too can accomplish in various spheres of life with excellence, be it education, law, journalism, economics, management, administration, business, or politics. According to the latest census, there are around more than 50 million visually disabled persons in India. This accounts of nearly 50%. It was also mentioned by Justice Vikramjit Sen in the morning that about more than 48% of the total population of the disabled is from amongst the visually impaired persons, and a very great majority of them are in rural areas in utmost abject poverty, which further complicates the situation. There is a close link between the disability and poverty. One leads to another, and this vicious circle is difficult to break. The human rights of the VH are no different than those of other citizens. However, the access to even basic human rights is still a distant dream. The government's plan and policies, the government plans and policies about the masses are not inclusive. Hence, their special needs to get ignored. Over the years, there has been constant concern the world over on human rights of the marginalized society, including the disabled fraternity, which has led to proclamation and enactment of various beneficial legislations at international and national levels. However, the disabled fraternity is still deprived of their rights, largely due to lack of awareness amongst themselves and in the enforcing agencies, and attitude of apathy and indifference shown by the implementing agencies. The essence of democratic setup enshrined in the Constitution of India is equality of opportunity to every citizen and level playing field for the marginalized and neglected classes of citizens. But its translation into action many a time meets stiff resistance. This situation has led to frustration, disappointment, and dejection amongst the stakeholders. Yes, sir, I'll come. Right. Okay. See, of course, the blind persons have become sometimes vocal. They adopt to various methods of advocacy, and sometimes they become aggressive also. But these do not get these do not get the benefits, the results, assured results, because they have got their limitations. The world over, there are many technological advances, which have made our lives, the life of the blind people much easier. But in India, we do not have even the facilities to operate bank accounts. I am talking about the blind persons, even the placed blind people. We do not have the access to the opening of bank accounts. We do not have the facilities of checkbooks. We do not have the facilities of opening the lockers, owning the lockers. But all these technologies are available to help us. The jobs have been identified, but there is no periodical review as enshrined in the Constitution. Then wherever that the jobs are not given to them, even the identified jobs are not always given to the blind people. And of course, I would request you, Lords, this job of civil judge is one amongst the identified jobs. We have sent several representations to high courts whenever the vacancies are advertised, but no reservation has been given to the blind people in the post of civil judges. When people like Roma Bhagat can successfully work as advocate in Supreme Court, when Mr. Rumta, whose name is being referred many times this morning, is a successful lawyer, when Mr. Sadan Chand Gupta has risen to the level of Advocate General in Calcutta High Court, why is it that we are not getting our due share in the judiciary itself? See, there is a myth, and even it's a myth, but I believe on that. We share one thing in common. There's one thing common between us, law and us. We both are blind. So let us join hands together for creating a better world. The world which is the world where there is no discrimination, the world where the disability is not seen as inability, the disability where the disability is, the emphasis is laid on abilities rather than disabilities. So I would request your Lordship to rise to the occasion and be with us and do whatever is in your hand. We have faith in God and judiciary. Judiciary means your Lordship. And because the paucity of time, I had so many things to discuss here, but I've cut short, and I'll conclude with a couplet dedicated to your Lordship. तुमको खुदा कहूँ या खुदा को खुदा कहूँ, तुमको खुदा कहूँ या खुदा को खुदा कहूँ, दोनों की शक्ल एक है, इसको खुदा कहूँ. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rastogi. I'm sorry for the paucity of time.
Shruti, only one small information for the benefit of Mr. Rastogi. The first constitutional court of South Africa had a blind judge in Justice Yaku.
Yes, he's still in the Constitutional Court. Yes. I now invite Dr. Achal Bhagat, a psychiatrist by profession. Dr. Achal Bhagat is closely involved with rehabilitation of persons with mental health issues. He is the director of Sarthak, an organization which deals with the issues of persons suffering from mental illness. Dr. Achal Bhagat.
Thank you for waking up. I'm going to try my best to keep it very short. But probably I'll start with a couplet. हर एक बात पे कहते हो कि तू क्या है, तुम ही कहो कि अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है. When you are a person with mental illness, your whole identity is demolished. You do not have any rights because the rights are taken away from you. You do not have a right to franchise. You do not have a right to contract. You do not have a right to marry. You do not have a right to even object to mistreatment because you cannot file a case. And you have to depend upon your psychiatrist to go and argue your case. And why should the psychiatrist do it? The psychiatrist is earning enough money. Why should the parent do it? Because the parent is anyway so tired of the mental illness and is burdened with the myth कि तो पागल हो गया है, या मैंने गलती की होगी, या किसने गलती की होगी. So when you are tired of such myths, why is anybody going to fight for you? So when you do not have anybody to fight for you, and when even in the disability sector, people said, we're not crazy, we're not mad, we're only intellectually challenged, we are disabled but we are not mad. When even the refrain within the disability sector puts you on the side, then trying to talk to people like you, who might be judges, and who might be brilliant judges, but you belong to the same society. You belong to the same discriminatory society that believes that mad people should be excluded. Right? And before you go and change the world, you have to change these myths in yourself. A mad person is a person first, a person with mental illness, and mad later. The mental illness comes later. And my challenge is, sirs, that unless we question our own myths about disability and mental illness, we are not going to change the world. And believe me, 80% of this house does not know enough about disability or mental illness to be able to go and change the world. I'm sorry I'm being blunt, but that's the reality, and that's what we need to start challenging. Yeah, and it's first a matter of a different discussion that talks about what kind of a judicial process needs to be in place so as to ensure substantive equality for women and to ensure a lack of criminalization of the victim and to ensure that the victim is not re-traumatized. That's a different matter of conversation which we can talk about when we talk about a judicial colloquium on gender and judiciary. We'll come back to that at some other point. The second point is about mental illness. I'll talk about that. And third point is about stigma. And stigma is more about information and what do we do with stigma. And if there is so much stigma in the society, can you be an oasis in that society and can you be different? Can judiciary or police or bureaucracy be any different from the society that it belongs to? Unfortunately not. Because we belong to the same society, and unless we impact the societal systems, the judiciary has a role in doing that. Believe me, all the good that has happened in the arena of mental illness has been brought forth by case law. Right? The law itself is so bad that it's not thrown out of the window. All the good that has happened has been brought forth by the case law, by judges like you, by informed judges like you. So, judiciary can do a lot to change the stigma, but the judiciary needs to start with knowing more about mental illness itself. May I have the next slide, please? May I have the next slide, please? Right. The law on mental health, the Mental Health Act 1987, which was the Indian Judiciary Act of 1938, is a bad law. Because it only addresses taking away the personal liberty of the person with mental illness. It only talks about how to put the person in a custodial environment. It does not talk about the rights of this person. It does not talk about how the person can get out of that environment. It only talks about putting the person in a custodial environment. And I'll tell you the story of institutionalization. I wonder if somebody from the sponsors is here, NHRC. Right, wonderful. In 1998, there was a report by the NHRC, and I'm going to quote from the report, and I'm going to quote from, I think this was Justice Venkacharaya who ensured that report came and saw the light of the day. And the report says, the walls of the hospital in Murshidabad are black. And the reason that they are black is because they're covered with human lice. That was 1999, the Human Rights Commission report saying that. Today is 2005, I visited Murshidabad only 5 weeks ago. The walls of Murshidabad are still black and they're still covered with human lice. human lice, pubic and hair lice. The reason they are black still is because the report has not been followed up. In spite of 3 PILs in the Supreme Court, in spite of interim orders, in spite of a lot of energy after Irwadi, and in spite of a lot of energy after the petition that my organization and I filed into the Supreme Court, nothing changes. And because nothing changes, the walls of Murshidabad still remain black. And it's not just walls of Murshidabad, it's 37 hospitals in the country. I have seen Srinagar in the last year. Srinagar has a room half this size with about 50 people naked in the heat of in the cold weather of Srinagar with no heating systems in a room half this size, 50 people. In Indore, I've seen room 1/4 this size last year only. All this is last year. It's not some time back in the past. 1/4 the size of this room, about 90 women naked in that room, locked and not opened ever, except to give food. And who eats, who does not eat? I've seen a halfway home put in place by an order by the Supreme Court in the Gwalior hospital, being monitored by NHRC and Action Aid. Right? And a halfway home is supposed to be like a home. People in uniform, people locked up, people in chains in a halfway home. Again last year. I'm saying when there is so much discrimination and so much violation of rights, and when the courts know about it, and when nothing changes, all that can be done is prevention of further violation, further stigma, and ensuring that more people don't end up in the same kind of hospitals. Right? This, alongside the fact that the Persons with Disability Act talks about mental illness and only talks about it as a 7th disability. The National Trust Act, of course, does not talk about us at all. The Persons with Disability Act it mentions us, but the policy does not take care of us, the programs don't take care of us. There is not a single penny that has been drawn from Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in the last 5 years by any NGO to provide any services except 3 NGOs. And so if there's no scheme, you go to the Health Ministry, they will say, go to the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. You go to the Social Justice and Empowerment Ministry, saying it's an illness issue, you go to the Health Ministry. So the Rural Health Mission does not address us. The umbrella schemes do not address us. If there is no scheme that addresses us, how will the services be provided? The National Trust Act talks about 4 major disabilities. The issues in autism, in cerebral palsy, and schizophrenia are the same. You need family support, you need foster care, you need guardianship, you need the same things. But why is there nothing that is going to be done for people with schizophrenia? It's just because they are people with schizophrenia and we think that they are mad and they can't do anything. In the morning there was a question asked, can a person with schizophrenia be employed? Somebody asked that question here. Thank you for asking that question. Not many people ask that question. I employ in my organization 5 people with schizophrenia and they are better than I am in some of the work that we do. Out of the 500 Fortune 500 companies, many middle managers, many senior managers have schizophrenia and are doing well. In India, many public sector companies have people with schizophrenia and doing brilliantly. Out of the people I see in my clinic every day, only 25% people need more support. 75% people with schizophrenia are doing very well in their jobs, in their marriages. They're good parents, they're good workers, they're good judges. I won't break confidentiality, but they are also good judges, they're good politicians, and at times good policemen, good bureaucrats, good politicians. If they're all that, why stigmatize just because there is the label of a disorder? May I have the next slide? So you don't have rights to adopt, you don't have rights to marry, your marriage can be dissolved. My question is that law that decides on the label of an illness the right law? when we're judging capacity, we have to judge capacity for adoption, for marriage, for contract at that point of time. And if the capacity is judged instance to instance, time to time, then I have all the capacity, because it's only a person with schizophrenia is only unwell, and can only have about 3 to 4 acute episodes lasting 15 to 20 days in their whole life. That's not even 60 days. That's not even the amount of time that you will be unwell with common cold in your life. And just because of that, if you are going to be barred from everything else in your life, I would hide my diagnosis. I would not go and seek reprieve. Because the moment I get the label, all my rights are taken away, and the moment I get the label, I'm locked down. So, please don't lock me up. Please give me that reprieve that I have rights as a human being, and I'm as communicative as any one of you are. I wish I was not here and speaking, but if one of my colleagues who has schizophrenia was speaking here, they would have to come here putting up a mask, because I'll tell you a story of my first cousin. My first cousin has schizophrenia and he's locked up in a basement for the last 10 years. Well, not 10 years, 15 years now. Both his sisters have not got married. His brother has had to migrate. My Mamaji is going to die in the next few months or maybe a year. He's 75. He's very old, very, very defeated. And nobody knows what to do with this man. He has schizophrenia. But the reason nobody, not even I, got to know that he had schizophrenia was because there was so much fear as to what will the world say, what will the people say. And he lives about 5 kilometers from the services that I provide. Right? And I'm one of the better psychiatrists in the country. I can't help my first cousin. Look at the helplessness of people who do not have access to any resources, anybody, any information. This is south of Delhi, bang, where the services are. Look at the plight, look at the pain that we suffer. And that's why we have to wear the masks. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So why not us? We have rights, we are people. Just because we have a label, please do not exclude us. Next slide. Next slide. Mental illness is very common. 1 in every 4 suffer from mental illness. The severe form of mental illness is slightly less common than the 1 in 4 variety that I'm talking about. The severe form, about 2 to 3 every 100 have a severe psychiatric disorder. 1 in 4 means 25% of this hall has a psychiatric disorder. Right? And we don't talk about it. Anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. That also means other thing. At least deaf people know how many deaf people are there in the country. At least visually challenged people know how many visually challenged people are there in the country. When the census was done, there was not a question on mental illness. Although mental illness is one of the disabilities, nobody counted mental illness. Right? It was included as a / mental illness as a part of the last question in mental retardation. Now, even if you don't even ask a question whether I have mental illness or not, how would we know what the problem is? So you have a myth that it's rare in India. It does not happen in our country. We are a good culture. It's got nothing to do with the culture. It's an illness. It can happen to anybody. Next slide, please. So, mentally ill people are mad. Yes. Whatever mad means. Mental illness is an illness. A lot of people suffer from it. It is the society's ignorance about it being an illness that creates a stigma around it. So people living with mental illness are people first. And you have to keep on reminding yourself that. Next slide, please. People with mental illness are emotionally weak. No. It's not about pulling up your socks and fighting the world. People with mental illness have an illness and anybody can have it. When they talk about their illness, they're actually being brave. When they seek help, they're actually being brave. So do not rubbish your child who says, I'm very stressed, I want to talk to someone about it. Do not rubbish your, women judges here today. Yeah, some. So, when your partner when a man wants to cry, let him cry. Our culture is like, don't cry, do whatever you do, don't cry. Because somehow we cannot stand people crying. What's wrong with crying? It's an emotion. What's wrong in expressing your emotions? It's when we start expressing our emotions ourselves that we will accept that other people can also have dysfunctional emotions that come in the way of their life. It's only because we put a lid on our emotions that we don't accept other people's emotional disturbances. May I have the next slide, please? Mental illness is treatable and can be controlled as much as diabetes or hypertension. And we are not asking for any favors. So at least don't think that we are, times of India, somebody rapes somebody, the headline will be, schizophrenic rapes a woman. Right? So how many times the person who's not a schizophrenic and they rape, how many times say, not a schizophrenic rapes a woman? You don't say that. You always will talk about the disability of the person and label that person, which will make it seem that schizophrenics are rapists or schizophrenic are more violent people. They are not. Next slide. People with mental illness are not more intelligent or creative than others. Yes, it is true that a lot of creative people also had a mental illness. But the reality is, we are as ordinary as all of you. So do not make us special by thinking that we are somehow mad because we are creative. Yes, Beethoven and Abraham Lincoln and many others had mental illness, but they are all part of the 25%. Unfortunately, 25% people have a mental illness. What's the big deal? Next slide. Mental illness is not a curse. We thought this about tuberculosis and leprosy as well. I'm sure you stop thinking this about tuberculosis and leprosy today. Hopefully in the next decade we'll stop thinking this about mental illness. Next slide. But most people respond well to treatment, either medical or psychological. Next slide. I've already said this. Next slide, please. The family support is the most important support, but because the family gets hounded into being invisible, they are not able to provide the support that they can. They dump the person in a hospital and in their back walls of Murshidabad. Thank you.
Thank you all the panelists. With that, we end this session. I am now inviting Justice Esa, but it's not a part of the schedule. There was a communication gap there, and I take the blame for that on behalf of the organization, of my organization. Justice Bhatt, may I now invite Justice Bhatt on the and another Judge in the High Court of Delhi. Apart from his many illustrious judgments on other areas of law, Justice Bhatt has authored several of the judgments on disability rights that have been repeatedly mentioned in the course of the day today. Justice Bhatt has been looking at the international jurisprudence on the disability rights and juxtaposing them with the Indian jurisprudence that is emerging on disability rights. I invite Justice Bhatt on the board.
For the call to speak to this gathering. I think it's a very good occasion that people meet and discuss this. It's very necessary that we keep ourselves up to date, and not only should we update ourselves in the field of law, but also in other related fields, particularly the medical. I was listening with fascination the previous speakers. I'll just take off from where Mr. Rastogi stopped. He said that law and blindness have something in common. I'll just start I won't call it a presentation, with this quotation from Victor Hugo, I think, that the law, in its serene majesty, enjoins the rich and the poor alike not to sleep in public spaces. And that applies even to persons with disabilities, because the law generally does not see disabilities differently, and even laws, even judgments. We as most of the speakers have been pointing out, we non-disabled persons, not normal, non-disabled persons tend to see disabilities in a different manner. Now, I thought I will speak about that initially, and then I discovered, to my pleasant surprise, that this article of Gerard Quinn and Theresia Daniel is part of the compilation which has been given to you. I would urge all of you to look at it, because it gives a lot of ideas. Now I'll just speak about it briefly in this context. In the past, international law paid little attention to the rights of persons with disabilities. The law addressed disability as a medical impairment, and the subject was generally included in legislation dealing with welfare. However, recent developments, primarily due to the efforts of national disability rights movements, have led to a revolution in the way that disability is being addressed by the international legal community. The new paradigm focuses on a social model of disability, whereby social and political constructs based on false stereotypes rather than impairments lead to the segregation and exclusion of people with disabilities. Now there are two models here. One is called the medical model of a disability, which is juxtaposed with the human rights model. The medical model highlights on the person's traits such as the specific impairments. This has the effect of focusing the problem of disability within the person. The medical model is reflective of a social attitude to view the person as an object of clinical intervention. The human rights model, on the other hand, focuses on the dignity of the human being and subsequently, but only if necessary, on the person's medical characteristics. It keeps the person, not the disability, at the forefront on issues affecting him. Crucially, it focuses the cause, not the person, but in society. The problem of disability under this model stems from a lack of responsiveness by the state and civil society to the difference that disability represents.